Waddesdon Manor does not begin as a country house in the English sense of the term. It begins as a declaration. When construction started in the early 1870s, on a windswept hill in Buckinghamshire that had no historic estate attached to it, the choice itself was revealing. This was not an inherited seat slowly adapted over centuries. It was land acquired, reshaped, and elevated, physically and symbolically, to host something new. From the first sketches, the building was conceived not as a retreat, but as a signal, one meant to be read clearly by Victorian Britain's most entrenched elites. The design rejected the familiar vocabulary of English aristocratic architecture. There would be no Palladian restraint, no Georgian understatement, no pastoral modesty. Instead, the manor rose as a French Renaissance chateau, complete with steep slate roofs, clustered towers, ornate dormers, and a skyline meant to be seen from miles away. The reference points were not local. They were continental. Chambord, Blois, and the Loire Valley hovered behind the façade, translated into an English landscape with deliberate precision. This was architecture speaking a foreign accent, and that accent mattered. In Victorian Britain, architecture functioned as a language of class legitimacy. Old families spoke it fluently. Their houses evolved slowly, accumulating authority through age. For families whose wealth was newer, earned through banking, finance, and international trade, the problem was not money. It was acceptance. Stone, scale, and style became tools to compress generations of status into a single act of construction. Waddesdon Manor was built to solve that problem in one stroke. Stand at the base of the hill and look upward. The climb is intentional. The manor dominates its approach, forcing visitors to rise toward it, physically enacting hierarchy before a word is spoken. The house does not blend into the countryside, it commands it. Earth was moved, roads were redirected, and entire sight lines were engineered so that arrival became ceremony. This was not accidental beauty. It was spatial choreography, designed to impress before entry and to linger in memory long after departure. The choice of a French Renaissance style carried layered meaning. France represented court culture, dynastic power, and centuries of elite refinement. By the late 19th century, Britain's aristocracy still measured itself against those continental traditions, even as it claimed moral superiority. To build a French chateau on English soil was to insert oneself into that older lineage, bypassing the slow accumulation of inherited prestige. It was power without a crown, expressed in limestone and slate. Step closer and the scale reveals itself more clearly. Waddesdon was not built to house a family in private seclusion. It was built to host. Vast reception rooms, long galleries, and ceremonial staircases signaled that this was a house designed for movement, of people, of influence, of reputation. Even the exterior symmetry communicates order and control. Nothing feels accidental. Every tower balances another. Every decorative flourish serves a larger composition. The message is coherence, permanence, authority. Behind the façade, modern infrastructure reinforced the statement. While many older estates struggled with outdated systems, Waddesdon incorporated advanced technologies from the outset. Gas lighting, central heating elements, and purpose-built service corridors ensured that the machinery of luxury operated invisibly. Guests experienced comfort without friction. Servants moved unseen. Efficiency supported spectacle. This was not merely wealth displayed, it was wealth organized. The cost of such a project was staggering by Victorian standards. Construction alone ran into hundreds of thousands of pounds, equivalent to tens of millions today, before furnishings, art acquisitions, and landscape engineering were even considered. Entire teams of craftsmen were imported. Stone was sourced, cut, and transported specifically to meet aesthetic demands. Time was compressed through capital. What would normally take generations was purchased outright. This compression is key to understanding Waddesdon's purpose. Old country houses are layered records of survival, adaptations to war, tax, marriage, and inheritance. Waddesdon skips that story. It arrives fully formed as if it has always been there. The illusion is deliberate. Visitors are meant to forget the speed of its creation, to experience it as timeless. But the speed is the point. It reveals the power behind it. Step into the imagined moment of its completion. The house stands finished, immaculate, already populated with fine art, rare furniture, and objects with centuries-long provenance. The effect is disorienting. Time has been manufactured. Cultural legitimacy has been assembled. What appears ancient is, in fact, brand new. Behind the façade, unseen hands have accelerated history. Victorian society understood this language immediately. Newspapers commented on the audacity of the design. Guests remarked on its foreignness, sometimes with admiration, sometimes with unease. The manor disrupted expectations. It challenged the quiet hierarchy of English landed wealth by arriving fully armored, visually and culturally, without apology. It asked a question without ever voicing it. If wealth can build this, what else can it command? Waddesdon Manor functioned, from the beginning, as a stage. Its architecture framed social rituals that reinforced power structures. Invitations carried weight. Attendance signaled inclusion. Absence carried its own message. The house amplified these dynamics by existing at a scale that made refusal difficult. To decline was to acknowledge its importance. To attend was to submit, at least briefly, to its authority. Yet there is tension embedded in the stone. The very excess that communicates dominance also exposes vulnerability. A house built as a statement must constantly justify itself. It must be maintained, staffed, heated, repaired. The bill comes due every day. Waddesdon's grandeur depended not only on its initial construction but on an ongoing commitment to keep the illusion intact. Power, once expressed architecturally, demands constant reinforcement. Behind the façade lies the deeper question the building raises. Who really paid for this? Not only in money but in labor, logistics, and social cost. In 19th century Britain, wealth alone was never enough. Money could buy land, art, and labor, but it could not automatically purchase belonging. The aristocracy operated on lineage, not balance sheets, and families who arrived late, no matter how rich, were treated as provisional. The Rothschilds understood this reality with brutal clarity. They had mastered finance across Europe, funded governments, stabilized currencies, and survived revolutions, yet in Britain they remained something slightly apart. Respected, feared, relied upon, but not fully embraced. Waddesdon Manor was conceived as an answer to that problem. This was not about comfort or retreat. It was about leverage. The Rothschilds did not attempt to imitate the understated country houses of the English gentry, because imitation implies deference. Instead, they built something that forced comparison on their own terms. By erecting a chateau that rivaled and in many cases surpassed the great estates of the landed elite, they reframed the conversation. The question was no longer whether they belonged. The question became how others measured up. Architecture in Victorian Britain functioned as social evidence. A house demonstrated not only wealth but stability, proof that a family expected to endure. Old families had houses that accumulated authority through age, even when their finances declined. New money lacked that visual shorthand. Waddesdon solved this deficit by manufacturing gravitas. Its scale, ornamentation, and confidence announced permanence. It did not ask permission to exist. It assumed it. Step into the social world of the 1880s. Invitations matter more than statements. Who dines together determines who counts. The Rothschilds understood that social acceptance could not be argued. It had to be engineered. Waddesdon Manor was built as a stage for that engineering. Its purpose was to host, to dazzle, and to recalibrate social hierarchies through experience. When Britain's aristocracy arrived, they were not visiting a financier's house. They were entering a court. Behind the façade, the strategy was meticulous. Guest lists were curated with precision. Royals, politicians, cultural figures, and influential families were brought together under one roof, often for extended stays. The manor's layout facilitated this intimacy. Long weekends blurred into conversations. Conversations became relationships. Relationships translated into legitimacy. The house did the work silently, through proximity and ritual, not persuasion. Stand in the dining room and imagine the choreography. Seating arrangements reflected rank, but also suggested parity. No one was treated as a benefactor. Everyone was treated as a peer. Service was flawless, unobtrusive, and relentless. The machinery of luxury ensured that nothing disrupted the illusion. Guests were never asked to confront the labor sustaining the experience. What they saw was ease. What they felt was inevitability. This was social pressure at its most refined. To reject the Rothschilds after accepting their hospitality required an act of conscious exclusion, something few were willing to risk. Declining an invitation became conspicuous. Attendance normalized the relationship. Over time, repetition did the rest. The house turned novelty into routine. Routine turned into tradition. The choice of Waddesdon's location was also strategic. Positioned within reach of London but removed enough to feel exclusive, it demanded commitment from its guests. Travel itself became a filter. Those who arrived had already invested time and effort, reinforcing the significance of the visit. The journey up the hill, the gradual reveal of the building, the sense of arrival, every element reinforced hierarchy while subtly placing host and guest on equal footing. The Rothschilds did not merely entertain the aristocracy, they absorbed it into their orbit. Art collections displayed cultural fluency. Architecture signaled historical awareness. Protocol balanced respect with confidence. This was power without a crown, exercised through environment rather than decree. The house became a social instrument, calibrated to convert financial capital into symbolic capital. But there was tension beneath the polish. Old aristocratic families understood the threat. Waddesdon represented a future where lineage could be bypassed by design, where wealth could build its own traditions faster than bloodlines could decay. Some resisted quietly. Others leaned in, recognizing survival and alignment. The house exposed fault lines in a society already under pressure from industrialization, democratic reform, and shifting economic power. Behind the façade, unseen hands kept the system running. Hundreds of staff managed kitchens, stables, gardens, lighting, heating, and logistics. Supplies flowed constantly. Costs mounted daily. The bill came due not once but forever. This was the price of maintaining social leverage through architecture. A house built as a weapon cannot be allowed to falter. Decline would undermine the very legitimacy it was meant to secure. Step past the showpiece rooms and consider the corridors that guests never saw. Service staircases, storage rooms, staff quarters, spaces designed for efficiency, not beauty. These hidden systems remind us that social acceptance was not free. It was paid for in wages, maintenance, and relentless attention to detail. The grandeur above depended on discipline below. What Waddesdon achieved was not universal affection, but recognition. It forced Britain's elite to confront a reality they preferred to ignore, that power had shifted. Finance could now rival land. International networks could outmaneuver inherited titles. The house did not erase prejudice, but it neutralized it through exposure. Familiarity dulled resistance. Awe softened hostility. Over time, the question of whether the Rothschilds belonged faded. The house normalized their presence. It rewrote the social script not by argument but by repetition. Weekends passed. Seasons changed. The manor endured. And with it, the family's position solidified. Yet the moral tension lingers. Waddesdon's success raises an uncomfortable question about society itself. If belonging can be built, if legitimacy can be purchased and staged, what does that say about the structures it penetrates? The house is beautiful. The strategy was effective. But beauty here masked transaction. The architecture of Waddesdon Manor was never meant to be neutral. Every line, every tower, every measured imbalance between restraint and excess was chosen to communicate something precise. This was beauty with intent. From a distance, the symmetry alone does the first work. The façade presents balance and order, a visual assurance that nothing here is improvised. Symmetry in architecture has always implied control over resources, over labor, over time itself. At Waddesdon, that control is absolute. The building does not evolve organically, it arrives complete, fully resolved, as if uncertainty had been engineered out of the stone. Move closer and the scale asserts itself. The manor is large, but more importantly, it feels large in relation to the human body. Towers rise beyond practical necessity. Rooflines climb higher than function demands. This is not defensive architecture, nor domestic architecture. It is declarative. Scale here is not about accommodation, it is about dominance. The house positions the visitor as small, temporary, and contingent, while the structure implies endurance. You are meant to feel the imbalance. That feeling is the message. Stand before the entrance and notice how the composition pulls the eye upward. Vertical emphasis signals aspiration and permanence, an upward reach that suggests longevity rather than comfort. The steep roofs and clustered chimneys evoke centuries of European aristocratic building traditions, even though the structure itself is comparatively young. This is visual time travel. Architecture is being used to borrow age. What looks ancient is, in fact, recent, but the illusion is convincing enough to suspend disbelief. Behind the façade, excess becomes a language of legitimacy. Ornamentation is not scattered randomly. It is disciplined. Carved stonework, decorative dormers, and elaborate balustrades repeat motifs with deliberate consistency. Repetition is crucial. It suggests system, not indulgence. Excess that appears controlled communicates wealth that is stable rather than reckless. This distinction mattered deeply in a society that distrusted sudden fortune. Waddesdon's architecture reassures by overwhelming, but never losing composure. Step inside and the same logic applies. The internal symmetry mirrors the exterior, reinforcing order at every turn. Corridors align. Rooms unfold predictably. Sightlines are long and intentional, allowing guests to see across spaces and anticipate movement. Nothing feels accidental. This predictability creates psychological comfort for visitors, while simultaneously asserting that the environment is governed by rules they did not create. You are welcomed, but you are not in charge. The house functions like a machine, and machines depend on precision. Service areas are meticulously separated from ceremonial spaces. Hidden corridors run parallel to grand halls, allowing staff to circulate unseen. This separation is architectural power made physical. Luxury appears effortless because labor is erased from view. What they don't show is just as important as what they display. The building trains the eye to ignore the systems that sustain it, reinforcing the illusion of natural abundance. Look again at the proportions. Rooms are generous but not chaotic. Ceilings are high enough to inspire awe, yet restrained enough to avoid echoing emptiness. The balance is exacting. Too much openness would signal waste. Too little would suggest insecurity. Waddesdon threads this needle carefully. The architecture communicates confidence. Confidence that resources will continue to flow, that maintenance will never lapse, that the bill will always be paid. Materials deepen this message. Stone conveys permanence. Slate roofs resist weather and time. Iron, glass, and structural reinforcements quietly support the visual drama. These choices are expensive not just to install but to maintain. They announce a long-term commitment. A house built of such materials expects to be repaired, not replaced. That expectation is itself a claim of legitimacy. Temporary wealth builds cheaply. Enduring wealth builds to last. Step past the showpiece rooms and sense the infrastructure humming beneath the surface. Heating systems, lighting networks, water supply, all integrated from the outset rather than retrofitted later. This foresight signals modern power disguised as tradition. The house looks backward stylistically but forward operationally. That combination is deliberate. It reassures conservative elites while quietly demonstrating technical mastery. Old money appearance, new money efficiency. The symmetry extends beyond aesthetics into social signaling. Balanced facades suggest fairness and order, even when the reality beneath is deeply hierarchical. Architecture here performs moral theater. It presents a world where everything has its place, where chaos has been excluded. This matters because legitimacy depends not just on wealth, but on the perception of stewardship. Waddesdon's design implies that power here is responsible, disciplined, and therefore deserved. Excess plays a subtler role. There is always more than necessary, more rooms, more ornament, more space, but never so much that it tips into vulgarity. This restraint distinguishes dominance from desperation. The building never begs for attention. It assumes it. Excess becomes background noise, a constant reminder of capacity rather than a cry for validation. Behind the facade, intimidation works quietly. Guests absorb the message subconsciously. The house suggests that those who built it can outlast social shifts, economic downturns, even political upheaval. It projects immunity. That projection influences behavior. People defer to what appears permanent. They align with what seems unmovable. Architecture becomes persuasion without argument. Yet intimidation carries cost. The cost of keeping it alive is relentless. Symmetry must be preserved. Stone must be cleaned. Roofs must be repaired. Staff must be retained and managed. Systems must be updated without disrupting appearances. The house demands constant attention. Its authority depends on uninterrupted performance. Any lapse would crack the illusion and expose vulnerability. Inside Waddesdon Manor, luxury was never an end in itself. It was a system. Every room, every object, every carefully curated silence served a purpose beyond admiration. The interiors were designed to work, to move people, to slow time, to shape conversations, and to create conditions where influence could be exercised quietly. What appears as opulence is, in fact, infrastructure. This was not decoration. It was strategy disguised as taste. Stand in the great reception rooms and notice how space dictates behavior. The ceilings are high enough to instill awe, yet not so vast that voices disappear. Sound carries just far enough to encourage intimacy without eavesdropping. Floors guide movement. Furniture groups guests into manageable clusters. Nothing forces confrontation, but nothing allows isolation. The room itself becomes a moderator, gently steering social flow. Conversations begin, overlap, and dissolve, all without urgency. Time stretches. Decisions ripen. Art plays a central role in this choreography. The collections are not random accumulations of wealth, they are signals. Paintings, sculptures, tapestries, each chosen for provenance, not shock. Old masters establish continuity with Europe's cultural elite. Decorative arts reinforce fluency, not novelty. The message is subtle but persistent. The hosts belong to a world older than money alone. Guests are not asked to admire. They are asked to recognize. Step past the showpiece rooms and the tone shifts. Dining spaces are calibrated differently. Here, ritual takes precedence. Long tables encourage hierarchy without overt dominance. Seating arrangements are deliberate, often recalibrated between meals. Who sits beside whom matters. Who is placed at a distance matters more. Food becomes a medium of persuasion. Courses arrive with precision. Service is constant yet invisible. No interruption is allowed to fracture momentum. The machinery of luxury hums quietly beneath the table. Meals at Waddesdon were not merely social. They were operational. Lengthy dinners created opportunities for private asides, whispered assurances, and unrecorded understandings. Behind the facade of conviviality, Negotiations unfolded without paper or witnesses. No contracts were signed in these rooms, but futures were shaped. Influence works best when it feels unforced. The interiors were built to make agreement feel natural. Private rooms extend this logic further. Drawing rooms, libraries, and salons offered controlled environments for selective access. Invitations narrowed. Conversations deepened. Here, away from the spectacle, trust could be tested. The scale becomes more personal, the lighting softer, the pace slower. These rooms are designed to hold secrets without acknowledging them. Walls absorb sound. Corridors divert traffic. What they don't show is as important as what they reveal. Behind hidden doors, staff orchestrated every detail. Servants moved through concealed passages, anticipating needs before they surfaced. Glasses refilled without request. Fires maintained exact temperatures. Lighting adjusted as daylight faded. This precision eliminated friction. Guests were never reminded of logistics. Comfort felt inevitable. That inevitability created psychological ease, and ease invites candor. In such conditions, people speak more freely. They listen more carefully. The bill for this seamless experience was immense. Hundreds of staff were required to maintain the illusion at all times. Schedules were rigid. Roles were specialized. Footmen, maids, cooks, stewards, all synchronized to avoid overlap or error. Supplies flowed constantly. Fresh food, wine, fuel, linens, nothing could be allowed to run short. The cost of keeping it alive was not episodic. It was continuous. Luxury here functioned like a factory running at full capacity. Step into the private quarters and notice another shift. These spaces were not ostentatious. They were controlled. Bedrooms and studies emphasized discretion over display. The architecture encourages reflection. Windows frame the landscape without exposing the interior. Doors close softly. Privacy is protected. This balance between openness and concealment allowed the house to operate on multiple levels simultaneously: public grandeur above, private deliberation below. The interiors also managed memory. Guests left with impressions carefully curated by experience rather than instruction. They remembered warmth, ease, generosity. They remembered feeling included. What they rarely remembered was the labor, the expense, the planning that made it possible. Influence thrives when effort disappears. Waddesdon's interiors perfected that disappearance. Stand still in one of the corridors and sense the flow. Movement is constant, but never chaotic. The building absorbs activity without revealing it. This containment is power. It allows the house to host competing interests without collision. Conversations overlap without interference. Alliances form quietly. Tensions dissipate before surfacing. The space itself moderates risk. Behind the elegance lies moral tension. The beauty is undeniable. The experience is persuasive. Yet the purpose is instrumental. Hospitality becomes leverage. Comfort becomes currency. Those who benefit may not notice the exchange, but it occurs nonetheless. Acceptance is earned through participation. Refusal becomes awkward. Presence becomes complicity. The interiors also reinforce hierarchy without stating it. Guests are treated as equals, but the house never relinquishes control. Movement is guided. Access is selective. Information flows asymmetrically. The hosts know more than the guests, not through secrecy but through design. This asymmetry is subtle but decisive. Power without a crown rarely announces itself. As hours pass, fatigue lowers defenses. Long evenings soften resistance. The environment encourages agreement by making disagreement feel impolite. This is not coercion. It is cultivation. The house nurtures outcomes through atmosphere rather than force. Decisions feel personal, even when they serve broader interests. Behind the façade, unseen hands reset the stage each day. Rooms are restored. Objects return to exact positions. Nothing is allowed to accumulate disorder. Disorder suggests decline. Decline would undermine credibility. The interiors must always appear effortless, even when effort is overwhelming. This is the hidden cost of influence exercised through space. When Europe slipped into crisis, Waddesdon Manor did not close its doors. It narrowed them. Public life receded, but the house did not fall silent. Instead, activity moved inward, away from spectacle and into containment. Wars do not only redraw borders, they compress behavior. At moments when empires trembled and governments fractured, elite estates like this one became places where continuity could be rehearsed behind the façade, even as the world outside lost its footing. Stand in the long corridors and imagine the shift. The same walls that once framed leisure now absorbed urgency. The rhythm of the house changed. Guests arrived quietly, sometimes unannounced, often staying longer than planned. Luggage came without ceremony. Names were spoken carefully. The house had always been designed for discretion, and now that design paid dividends. Waddesdon became a refuge not in the sentimental sense, but in the operational one. A controlled environment where uncertainty could be managed. During periods of European instability, information became more valuable than display. Telegraphs and letters moved faster than armies, and estates with international networks were uniquely positioned to receive fragments before they coalesced into headlines. Waddesdon sat within those networks. Messages arrived from financial centers, from diplomatic channels, from family branches spread across borders that were suddenly hostile. No official records remain of these exchanges. They were never meant to. Step past the showpiece rooms and into spaces designed for privacy. Smaller salons, libraries, and studies became the true centers of gravity. Maps were consulted. Letters read and reread. Conversations lowered to murmurs. Decisions were framed not as declarations but as adjustments. How long to stay? Who to contact? What assets to move? The house facilitated this work without revealing it. Its architecture absorbed tension and released calm. Wars also bring displacement. People arrive carrying fear disguised as composure. Waddesdon offered shelter without publicity. Not charity but protection. Rooms filled quietly. Meals were served without comment. Staff were instructed to notice nothing. The machinery of luxury continued, but with altered purpose. Comfort now served endurance. Stability became a form of resistance. Behind the façade, logistics intensified. Supplies had to be secured amid shortages. Fuel rationed carefully. Staff retained even as other estates dismissed theirs. This was not indulgence, it was necessity. A house designed to function as a machine cannot simply power down. Once momentum is lost, restarting becomes costly, sometimes impossible. The bill comes due whether the world cooperates or not. Stand still and consider the silence. It is not emptiness. It is discipline. During crises, silence protects. It prevents panic. It prevents exposure. The house's layered design, public above, private below, allowed multiple realities to coexist. Guests could believe they were merely resting. Hosts could believe they were preparing. Both could be true. Information flowed through people rather than paper. Conversations over dinner carried more weight than documents that could be intercepted. A raised eyebrow. A delayed response. A sudden departure. These signals mattered. Elite estates functioned as filters, separating rumor from actionable knowledge. Waddesdon's interiors, built to encourage proximity without collision, were ideal for this work. Nothing needed to be recorded. Memory sufficed. Behind hidden corridors, staff adapted without explanation. They adjusted schedules, closed certain rooms, opened others. The choreography changed, but the performance remained smooth. Unseen hands absorbed the strain so that the surface never cracked. This invisibility was crucial. Anxiety spreads when systems appear fragile. Waddesdon was designed to look inevitable, even when nothing was. Financial crises followed military ones. Markets collapsed. Governments defaulted. Taxes rose. Estates across Britain were sold, subdivided, or abandoned. Waddesdon endured by tightening, not retreating. Art was secured. Assets reorganized. Decisions were made quietly, often preemptively. The house's very existence required anticipation. Waiting was not an option. Survival depended on motion disguised as stillness. Step into a room late at night and imagine the weight of those hours. Lamps burning low. Conversations circling the same unresolved questions. How long will this last? What will remain afterward? Who will remember? The house holds these questions without answering them. It has always been good at containment. Walls listen without responding. There is a moral tension here that never fully resolves. The same structures that offered refuge also insulated their occupants from consequences felt elsewhere. Safety inside meant exposure outside. Elite estates could absorb shocks that shattered entire communities. This imbalance is uncomfortable, and the architecture does nothing to soften it. Beauty persists while suffering accelerates beyond the gates. Yet survival itself becomes a kind of labor. Maintaining an estate through war and instability demands constant negotiation. Staff must be protected. Resources allocated. Visibility managed. Too much attention invites scrutiny. Too little invites decay. Waddesdon walked that line deliberately. It neither flaunted resilience nor advertised vulnerability. It simply remained. Behind the façade, time behaved differently. Days blurred. Weeks stretched. News arrived late or incomplete. Decisions made here might not be understood for years. That delay is part of the power. Actions taken quietly without announcement often shape outcomes more effectively than public declarations. The house provided cover for that quiet. Stand at a window and look out across the grounds. The landscape appears unchanged. Trees stand. Paths curve gently. The illusion of continuity is complete. But behind you, inside the walls, the world is being processed, filtered, and prepared for. The house does not fight wars. It survives them. And in surviving, it preserves influence. What remains undocumented is precisely what matters most. The conversations that left no trace. The choices that never appeared in ledgers. The protection extended without acknowledgement. This absence is not accidental. It is design. At Waddesdon Manor, the most powerful object was not art, architecture, or land. It was the invitation. Long before influence hardened into policy or finance, it moved socially, through access. Who crossed the threshold mattered more than what was discussed once inside. Attendance conferred relevance. Absence carried consequence. The guest list was not a courtesy, it was a ledger of power. Stand at the entrance and imagine arriving unannounced. It would not happen. Every visit was anticipated, weighed, approved. Names were selected with care, not volume. Waddesdon was never crowded. Density dilutes authority. Instead, gatherings were calibrated to create intimacy without equality. Each guest served a purpose, political, cultural, financial, or symbolic. The house did not host society. It curated it. Guest lists evolved with the moment. During periods of stability, aristocrats dominated, dukes, earls, heirs to long-declining estates whose titles still carried weight. Their presence signaled continuity. Alongside them appeared diplomats, ministers, foreign envoys, and cultural figures whose relevance extended beyond Britain's borders. This mixture was deliberate. Old legitimacy was paired with current utility. The house functioned as a bridge between worlds that rarely met on equal terms. Step into the drawing room and feel the tension beneath the pleasantries. Seating was never accidental. Proximity created opportunity. Distance imposed limits. A guest placed beside another was being tested, evaluated, or aligned. A guest seated apart was being observed. The architecture supported this theater. Rooms were large enough to contain multiple conversations, yet structured so that movement remained visible. Nothing escaped notice. Exclusion was the sharper instrument. To not be invited was to be marked. Silence carried meaning. In a society obsessed with status, omission was more telling than rejection. Those who fell from favor often did so quietly, discovering too late that invitations had slowed, then stopped. No explanation was offered. None was needed. Social power operates best without confrontation. The currency of invitation extended beyond individuals. Families were assessed collectively. A son's conduct could affect a father's access. A marriage could elevate or isolate an entire lineage. Waddesdon's guest lists reflected these calculations. The house remembered. Patterns emerged. Attendance repeated. Absence hardened. The ledger updated itself. Behind the façade, staff enforced this system with precision. Gatekeepers recognized names. Schedules were adjusted to ensure the right people crossed paths. Meals were timed. Walks were suggested. Even leisure was orchestrated. The machinery of luxury did not merely serve comfort, it served alignment. Guests felt chosen. That feeling is persuasive. Step past the showpiece rooms and consider the moments between events. Informal walks through the grounds. Late-night conversations near the fire. Breakfasts where decisions made the night before were quietly confirmed. These spaces mattered as much as formal gatherings. Influence often solidified away from the main stage. The house provided layers of interaction, each with its own rules and risks. Attendance also signaled safety. To be seen at Waddesdon was to be under its protection, however temporary. That protection extended socially. Critics softened. Rivals hesitated. Association implied endorsement. In volatile times, such signals mattered. The house did not issue statements. It issued invitations. Old money understood this language instinctively. Titles alone no longer guaranteed access. Relevance had to be maintained. Younger heirs learned quickly that lineage without alignment led to isolation. Waddesdon became a testing ground, separating those who could adapt from those who could not. Social survival preceded political survival. Behind the scenes, the cost of this theater mounted. Hosting required staff, supplies, security, and discretion. Every gathering demanded preparation and restraint. Mistakes were unacceptable. A misplaced guest, an overheard comment, an unanticipated clash could unravel carefully built networks. The house absorbed these risks daily. The bill came due in vigilance. Stand still and listen to the room after guests depart. Chairs are reset. Glasses cleared. The space returns to neutrality. But the effects linger. Alliances have shifted. Reputations adjusted. Futures nudged. None of this appears in records. The power exercised here leaves no paper trail. It survives in outcomes. The moral tension is unavoidable. Access concentrated influence. Those inside shaped narratives that affected those outside, often without ever meeting them. Exclusion meant irrelevance not because one lacked merit but because one lacked proximity. This is how old money power endures. It works socially first, invisibly, before it ever works publicly. Waddesdon's guest lists also reflected restraint. Not everyone powerful was welcome. Some were too unpredictable. Others too visible. Influence thrives on stability. The house favored those who understood discretion, who recognized that silence can be a form of loyalty. Loud power was unwelcome. Quiet power was cultivated. Step back and consider the pattern over decades. Names recur. Families intertwine. Roles evolve, but access remains selective. The house outlives its guests. It remembers their presence long after they are gone. This continuity reinforces authority. Individuals pass through. The system endures. Behind the elegance lies calculation. Hospitality is offered, but never without expectation. Gratitude becomes obligation. Obligation becomes alignment. Alignment becomes influence. None of this requires coercion. It unfolds naturally within the architecture of access. As the night deepens and the last carriage departs, the gates close. Inside, the house rests, ready to repeat the performance. Outside, the world continues, shaped in small ways by what transpired within. The invitation has done its work. Waddesdon Manor is most often introduced as a dream made of stone. A fairy tale chateau on an English hill. A triumph of taste, culture, and refinement. The public narrative lingers on elegance, on art collections, manicured gardens, and the romance of wealth well spent. But that story is incomplete. Behind the façade, the house reveals a different logic. One less sentimental. One more disciplined. This was never just a beautiful place to live. It was a tool built to last. Stand at a distance and take in the silhouette. The towers rise with confidence. The symmetry reassures. The whole composition suggests harmony and leisure. That image has been carefully preserved for more than a century, repeated in guidebooks, postcards, and curated tours. Yet elegance here is not innocence. It is camouflage. The building's grace distracts from its function, which was always strategic. Beauty was the language, not the goal. Step closer and the contradictions begin to surface. The house appears effortless, but effort saturates every inch. Nothing about Waddesdon is casual. Its scale exceeds domestic need. Its layout favors ceremony over comfort. Its systems prioritize reliability over charm. This is not a home that grew organically with a family. It is a structure designed to project continuity regardless of who occupied its rooms. A legacy with a price paid daily. The myth of elegance depends on forgetting how much discipline beauty requires. Waddesdon's surfaces are immaculate because disorder is not permitted. Behind the façade, schedules rule. Maintenance is relentless. Stone must be cleaned. Roofs repaired. Heating balanced. Staff coordinated. The machinery of luxury never stops. If it does, the illusion collapses. Elegance here is a performance sustained by unseen hands. Public narratives emphasize art and architecture as expressions of personal taste. The reality is more institutional. Collections are curated to signal lineage, not individuality. Rooms are arranged to manage perception, not intimacy. Even comfort is calculated. Chairs invite lingering but not slouching. Lighting softens faces, not scrutiny. Every aesthetic choice serves a larger purpose, to make power appear natural. Step past the showpiece rooms and consider what they conceal. Service corridors run parallel to grand halls. Staff move invisibly, trained to anticipate without intruding. This separation is not merely practical. It reinforces hierarchy. Those who belong above rarely see what sustains them below. What they don't show is integral to the experience. The absence of labor makes authority feel effortless. The romantic image also depends on selective memory. Tours highlight celebration, not endurance. They linger on moments of prosperity, not the quiet years when survival required constant adjustment. Taxes rose. Wars disrupted supply. Estates across Britain were abandoned or dismantled. Waddesdon endured because it was designed to. Its purpose was not enjoyment alone but preservation, of assets, of influence, of relevance. Stand in the hall and imagine the house empty. It still feels inhabited. That is not accidental. The architecture suggests continuity even in absence. Rooms remain poised for return. Furniture waits. Systems hum quietly. This readiness is a form of power. It signals that the house expects to be used again, that it anticipates survival. Elegance here is not about pleasure. It is about resilience. The myth also softens the moral tension embedded in the building. Waddesdon's beauty invites admiration, but admiration discourages questions. Who paid for this? Not only financially but socially. How many decisions were shaped within these walls, affecting lives far beyond the estate? The house presents itself as cultural heritage, yet it functioned as a center of alignment, exclusion, and control. Romance obscures responsibility. Behind the façade, dominance is subtle but constant. Guests are guided. Access is filtered. Movement is observed. The house does not coerce. It conditions. Over time, those who enter adapt their behavior. They speak more carefully. They listen more closely. The environment rewards conformity and discretion. This is how power survives without force. Continuity is the most carefully curated illusion of all. The house appears timeless, but time has been actively managed. Objects are restored to preserve a specific moment. Narratives are refined. Inconvenient episodes fade. Preservation becomes selection. What endures is what reinforces legitimacy. This is not deception. It is curation practiced at an architectural scale. Step back and consider the cost of maintaining this myth. It is not just money, though money is immense. It is attention. It is discipline. It is the constant suppression of entropy. Elegance requires vigilance. One neglected roofline, one understaffed wing, one visible crack could undermine the entire story. The bill comes due every day whether or not anyone is watching. The public story frames Waddesdon as a gift to culture, a monument preserved for admiration. That is true but incomplete. It is also a monument to strategy. It demonstrates how architecture can outlast individuals, absorbing shocks that would dismantle lesser structures. It shows how beauty can be weaponized, not to intimidate openly but to normalize authority. Stand quietly and let the contrast settle. The chandeliers glow. The rooms breathe calm. Outside, history moved violently, unpredictably. Inside, order held. That contrast is the house's true achievement. It created a pocket of control in a turbulent world. Elegance was the surface expression of that control, not its purpose. The myth persists because it is comforting. It allows admiration without discomfort. But the reality is more complex and more revealing. Waddesdon Manor was not built to delight alone. It was built to endure. To signal permanence in a fragile society. To convert wealth into legitimacy, and legitimacy into survival. Behind the beauty lies intent. Behind the romance lies calculation. The house invites awe, but it rewards scrutiny. When we look past the elegance, we see a structure designed not just to impress, but to remain, to stand when others fall, to shape narratives long after voices fade. Waddesdon Manor endures not simply because it is beautiful, but because it still performs. Long after the original calculations have faded from memory, the structure continues to communicate order, permanence, and quiet authority. Visitors arrive expecting romance and leave with something less comfortable. The unease is subtle. It does not announce itself. It lingers, asking questions the house never answers. Stand on the approach and feel the contradiction. The setting invites admiration, yet the scale resists intimacy. You are welcome but never equal. That sensation has not aged out of the stone. It persists because the building was designed to outlast moods, governments, and fashions. Architecture here does not reflect a moment. It enforces a system. Behind the façade, the discomfort begins with continuity. Waddesdon looks unchanged because change has been managed, filtered, and absorbed. Renovations preserve an idea rather than record history honestly. Objects are restored to maintain a narrative of stability. The past appears intact because instability has been edited out. This control over memory is unsettling in a world that expects transparency. The house also unsettles because it exposes how power can be exercised without spectacle. No banners. No declarations. Just rooms that shape behavior. Paths that guide movement. Spaces that reward conformity and discretion. Waddesdon demonstrates how influence can operate socially, aesthetically, and spatially, leaving no documents to dispute. What remains is effect without evidence. Step past the showpiece rooms and sense the discipline beneath the calm. The machinery of luxury still operates, even as its purpose has shifted. Staff schedules. Maintenance cycles. Preservation budgets. The cost of keeping it alive remains substantial. Money still flows to sustain an illusion of timelessness. The bill comes due quietly year after year, reinforcing the very hierarchy the house represents. Modern audiences feel the tension instinctively. We live in an age suspicious of inherited advantage, yet drawn to its artifacts. Waddesdon embodies that contradiction. It is presented as heritage, but it originated as strategy. It invites public access, yet retains the posture of private authority. That duality is difficult to reconcile. The unease deepens when one considers what the house normalized. It demonstrates how wealth can convert itself into legitimacy through environment alone. How comfort can smooth over inequality. How proximity can shape outcomes more effectively than argument. Waddesdon does not lecture. It persuades by existing. Behind the elegance lies exclusion. Not overt but structural. The house teaches who belongs by who feels comfortable within its walls. Even as a public site, it communicates hierarchy through scale and choreography. Visitors move where they are guided. They see what is prepared for them. Access remains selective even when the gates are open. Stand in a gallery and notice how silence behaves. It is not emptiness but containment. The house absorbs sound, motion, and descent. That containment once protected conversations and decisions. Today it protects the narrative. Discomfort arises because the same architecture that once facilitated influence now frames history. The line between preservation and endorsement becomes blurred. Waddesdon also unsettles because it survived when so many did not. Estates across Britain were sold off, stripped, or demolished under the weight of taxation, war, and social change. Waddesdon endured through planning, resources, and adaptation. Survival here is not accidental. It is proof of how systems protect themselves. The house becomes a mirror. It reflects uncomfortable truths about resilience and inequality, about how some structures are built to absorb shocks while others collapse, about how beauty can distract from mechanism. Visitors may admire the stonework, but what they sense is endurance, the feeling that this place will remain regardless of external pressure. Behind the façade, hierarchy is not displayed, it is assumed. That assumption persists because architecture trains perception over time. Repetition normalizes imbalance. Grandeur becomes familiar. Familiarity becomes acceptance. The house does not demand belief. It cultivates it slowly. The discomfort is sharpened by the absence of clear villains. Waddesdon is not a site of obvious cruelty. It is polite, orderly, civilized. That makes it harder to critique. Power here is not violent. It is refined. It does not shout. It whispers. And whispers travel further. Step back and consider why fascination persists. People return because the house offers more than beauty. It offers access to a system rarely visible. It allows visitors to stand inside a machine that once converted wealth into permanence. That proximity is thrilling and unsettling in equal measure. Modern preservation efforts complicate the picture further. The house is now framed as cultural inheritance, something to be protected and shared. That framing is sincere, but it also perpetuates the original logic. Preservation maintains hierarchy by freezing it in time. What was once strategic becomes canonical. The question of who paid for this never fully resolves. The answer extends beyond construction costs and wages. It includes social consequences. Opportunities redirected. Voices excluded. Narratives shaped. Waddesdon's endurance is inseparable from those unseen costs. Stand at the exit and look back once more. The house remains composed. It offers no apology and asks none. Its presence is calm, confident, and unresolved. That is why it still makes people uncomfortable. It reminds us that architecture can do more than shelter or inspire. It can preserve systems long after their origins are forgotten. Waddesdon Manor persists as a lesson written in stone. Not about taste but about continuity. Not about elegance but about control. It shows how hierarchy can be maintained quietly, beautifully, and effectively across generations. The discomfort arises because we recognize the pattern, and because it has not disappeared. As you leave the grounds, the question follows you out. In a world that claims to value openness and equality, what other houses are still performing the same work just as quietly? Which house should we investigate next?